Hello and welcome to Westcountry Wanderings. This is my brand new YouTube channel where we'll be exploring different parts of the West Country, namely Devon, Cornwall, parts of Dorset and Somerset, and looking at its history, the beautiful areas, some of the people, some of the artefacts that make up this interesting and fascinating corner of the United Kingdom. Due to lockdown at the moment, of course, only going to be looking at the immediate area where I live, which is close to Dartmouth, here in the South Hams in South Devon. Now, some of you may know Dartmouth already from holidays down to this lovely part of the world, but what I'm going to be doing, rather than exploring some of the more well-known parts of this town, I'm going to be focusing in on some of the interesting bits of history that some people may not be aware of. I'm going to start this new channel by looking at the steps. There are many steps that make up this town. Little alleyways, secluded little corners of this town, and each of them have their own little parts of history. And what we're going to be doing is looking at that in more detail and seeing what we can overcome. So why not come with me and let's explore further. Well, these are brown steps, formerly known as slippery steps or slippery chase, and after the rainfall we've had, I can indeed tell you that they are pretty slippery, so you have to watch your tread. Now, this lane or steps was the main entrance into Dartmouth before the main roads were built on the highways in medieval times when the market first opened, and the wealthy people paid for ponies to transport them up this quite testing stretch of hill, and they were actually tethered at the Grange courtyard just over the way back from where I am at the moment. This top of these steps leads on to a breathtaking view over the harbour. So at the top of these steps is where James Inder lived. He was an inventor. He actually built 3 steam motor cars in 1898, and these were the first cars in Dartmouth. Okay, we're now walking back down slippery steps. This is Chapel Lane, or Chapel Steps, and it is most famous is for the old chapel, which we'll go and have a look at in a minute. It was here in the 1600s, the time that the Mayflower left both Plymouth and Dartmouth. 1620, we would have had a big celebration last year if it was not for the pandemic. During the period from 1710 to 1729, the inventor of the steam engine was actually pastor of this chapel, and his descendants restored the chapel again in the early 19th century. So we'll have to just go up and have a quick look at that now. Beautiful chapel windows here. There are lots of artefacts around Thomas Newcomen. Around Dartmouth, Common Street, there's also a large memorial to him at the top of the hill as you come into the town. Obviously, when the chapel was built at the start of the 17th century, a lot of the buildings around it weren't there, so it would have been quite prominent on the hill. And the steps here now do a rather sharp curve to the left, giving them a rather atmospheric feel. Now this is the unmarked school steps. I'm just going to take you down here. I don't know the exact spot, but in the Second World War a bomb landed here and a particular person sadly lost their life. Can possibly work out where it is, judging by some of the buildings, the date of the buildings that are around it. So we'll just go and have an explore and see if we can find the location of that. The school no longer exists that these steps were built for, but they obviously still serve a very useful current purpose as the lanes serving the properties nearby in this part of the town. Now as we get to the lower part of the steps, you'll notice that the building to the right of me is a lot newer. This red brick here, probably late 60s, early 70s design. That could have been the location. But there's also an old retaining wall coming up with another property, much newer design property, probably 1990s, early 2000s, above it, with a newer replacement wall below it, which then backs onto some social housing. So I think it was at the lower part of the steps here. As I say, we can't be sure whether it's to the right or to the left where we are now, but it was certainly around there. So we've had a number of bombs fell in Dartmouth during the Second World War. Obviously, being a naval town, it was of major strategic importance for the Luftwaffe. And in fact, the Navy designed a dummy port over at Little Dartmouth direction on the coast. So Dartmouth would have been in blackout during the bombing raids, and the location just to the west of here, a couple of miles to the west, would have been fully lit with flares. We're actually in Dartmouth Community Orchard, which is a lovely place just off the Ridge Hill. The reason I brought you here is not so much for the woodland orchard, which it is lovely, and we'll look at that more in a minute, but it's actually because of the house behind me. You can just see that green property behind me. And it's not so much the property itself, it's the person that was born there. In the late 18th century, a gentleman called John Russell, born to John and Nora Russell, was born, and he had the nickname Jack. So you probably realise where we're actually going with this now. It's the Reverend Jack Russell. He was educated over at Tiverton. First of all, he went to Plimpton Grammar School and went to Blummells, which is still a private school in Tiverton. Upon leaving there, he went to Exeter College at Oxford University. And while he was there, he noticed the milkman doing his rounds one day, and the dog that was with the milkman was slightly unusual. So he was very interested in this dog, was Jack Russell, and he decided to put a proposition to the milkman, and he bought it from the milkman. And the dog was nearly like a whitey cream colour with tan coloured spots above its eyes. He actually bred this dog, thought it would be really suitable for his fox hunting, and he brought it back to Devon, bred it, and then defined the breed, the Jack Russell. He also set up the Kennel Club, and he moved later on to a village just outside of Barnstable, and he was the Reverend there for 40 years. And he also, as well as being a keen fox hunter, he was a judge at the Kennel Club as well. And later on, a long time after the Reverend Jack Russell passed away, there was another breed, which is a slightly longer lead version, called the Parson Jack Russell, and obviously Parson coming from his name from the Reverend that was born in this property just over the way. So just another little snippet of Dartmouth's history. So what we'll do now, we'll have a quick look around the woodland garden here. It's a lovely spot. I'm actually looking at, as I'm looking towards the camera, looking at the fantastic view of the Britannia Royal Naval College. So we'll have a quick look at that now. Now you can probably see that there. It was built in the early 19th century. And this is where the commissioned ranks do their training. It was also the place where our current Queen met Prince Philip. He was obviously in the Navy. She'd gone there to look at the passing out parade, and they met up. I believe the year was around 1947, but don't quote me on that, but I'm sure it was around towards the end of the Second World War. And recently they've started to do training of the non-commissioned ranks, previously done at HMS Raleigh in Cornwall, because there's been a recruitment drive for new recruits, and they've been taking some of the capacity up here. So it's a fantastic building. Has been open to the public, has open days now and again, and I think the last time was in 2019. It was open for a couple of days, but if you ever get the chance to come to Dartmouth and it's open, I would highly recommend it. So we'll just have a quick look around the rest of the garden here to see what is there to look at. While we're here in the woodland garden, the community garden, thought we'd have a little chance to explore before we explore some more steps and little bits of historical artefacts of Dartmouth. So we'll just have a quick look around and to see what's here. As you can see, it's the Dartmouth Community Orchard, and there is a Friends Association to look after. Obviously it's a great woodland habitat for numerous types of wildlife, lots of different plants, and as you can see from the notice board there's taller flowers, knapweed, meadowsweet and umbellifers, as well as apple trees, mature oaks, ashes and sweet chestnuts. It is above the busy main road entrance. Well, it's actually a bypass road. It wasn't the main road as you had seen from earlier in the video. The main road was the Packhorse slippery steps, but this was opened many years later and is the main hill into the town. That bell you can hear is the bell in the main clock tower of the Naval College. Now I have a tour further on down through the fruit trees and look at the other parts of this lovely little garden. When I was doing research for this first vlog, I uncovered a great deal of historical artefacts about this small South Devon town, Dartmouth. Despite its maritime history, there are a lot of other interesting things that happened in the town. Now, obviously, we're currently in a pandemic, and you'd probably be aware there was a lot of interest around the Spanish flu, which actually happened towards the end of the First World War. However, Dartmouth had another pandemic, a much smaller scale one, but still a pandemic, just a few years before the Spanish flu in 1912, and this was due to Scarlet Fever. The pandemic, or the actual fever, swept through the poor quarters of Dartmouth, and the reputation of the town actually fell dramatically. It also frightened the Navy to such an extent that the Britannia Royal Navy College, which sits on the hill, when you saw the piece I did at the Dartmouth Community Orchard, you would have seen the Naval College there. They actually put an embargo on all of the cadets actually coming into the town because they were petrified that they would catch the Scarlet Fever when they were coming into the town. It caused a problem financially too, because the traders, hoteliers and boatmen all lost money because people stopped visiting the town because of the reputation of the Scarlet Fever. People were too scared to come into the town. And the cadets, the naval cadets, suffered too because none of their families would come to visit them on passing out parades or during the course of their time that they spent here in Dartmouth. The Britannia Royal Naval College embargo actually lasted for 9 months, and at the end of it, the naval authorities pressed further boards like the water boards, water treatment works, and the health boards into a full inquiry as to what was going in, what was happening in Dartmouth to cause this spread of scarlet fever. Towards the end of 1912, a local builder and plumber, one Frederick Vosey, decided to put himself up for election to become the town's sanitation, water board and top health authority, even though he was not qualified in any of those areas of expertise at all. Despite this and 107 other applicants, he was successful. But the town was still not happy that this person in charge was going to make the relevant changes that were needed in the town. So they hired a private eye. Now, this medical private eye actually arrived the following year in the spring, April of 1913. He was called Dr. Mivari, and he spent a great deal of time going around, particularly around the tenements of the town, some of which the area, it's not a tenement area now, but remember Slippery Steps? Well, some of that area had tenement buildings in it at that time. Also the area around Oxford Slip and out towards where the lower ferry is. He did a lot of exploration to the tenements and found a lot of the living conditions in the town were most unsanitary and caused this scarlet fever to spread. He found rotting, decaying buildings which were full of rats and vermin. In Higher Street, he found an apartment which measured just 6 feet by 8 feet, and 2 young boys were actually living in those very, very cramped conditions, and the ceiling was actually less than 6 foot tall, so you can imagine how difficult that must be. By the time he was doing his survey, the infant mortality was actually as high as 100 in 1,000, i.e. 1 in 10. Which was very, very high, even for those days just over 100 years ago. Part of the problem that Dr. Mivari uncovered was the population increase. Towards the end of the 19th century, the population of Dartmouth stood at just 1,000, and it actually had increased to over 7,000 in just 20 years. By comparison, the current population of Dartmouth is actually just over 5,000. It's actually decreased since the Scarlet Fever epidemic in 1912. Dr. Mivari also analysed the water supply and found at the bottom of Slippery Steps, or Silver Street, and towards Undercliff, behind the current George and the Dragon pub, the open sewers there were actually contaminating the water supply, causing outbreaks of diphtheria as well as the problems with the scarlet fever. Although the scarlet fever started to decline of its own accord, Dr. Mivara's report was actually published in the following year in 1914. It was superseded, of course, by the outbreak of First World War, and a lot of his recommendations to the Board of Health were never carried out. And it wasn't until some time after, in the 1930s, that the sun clearance went underway, and a lot of the properties were actually demolished and rebuilt in other places in Dartmouth. Well, thanks very much for joining me on a little tour around some of the history of Dartmouth. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe give me a like and perhaps a follow. And if you've got time, do put a comment in there, particularly if you've been to Dartmouth or you know the area and know a little bit about its history. Certainly couldn't cover all of the history in Dartmouth in one little vlog, but we will be returning to the town in the not too distant future, probably covering the castle at some point. The next vlog, though, will feature Blackpool Sands, which is just a couple of miles from where I am at the present time, and it has a beautiful beach there, as you may be aware. It also has lots of interesting history to do with battles and the British Navy, so we'll be looking at that and exploring the beautiful scenery, some of the interesting aspects of the river. It's named after the River Black, which flows into the sea there, and we'll be looking at part of that, and also the history of the gardens that are there and some of the old mills in the area as well. So if you want to join me with that, if you hit the subscribe and the notification bell, you'll be alerted. YouTube will let you know when that goes live. So thanks again for joining me on the journey today, and maybe look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Thanks again. Cheers. Bye-bye.